Thank you, Amy. Hey, good afternoon. Full disclosure, I am not here to tell you how to do your jobs. As CIOs and IT professionals, I think you've got this. I am here to elevate the job you do by giving you specific tactical tools and techniques that will help you sharpen the most critical leadership skill that you can build today, which is the ability to sell your ideas persuasively. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you cannot sell it persuasively, you won't be nearly as successful. Now, I, like you, analyze data. I look for patterns. I ask questions. Questions led me to write a book called The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, one of my earliest communication books. I asked the question, how is it that Jobs was such an extraordinary presenter? And how did he convince people that they had a problem even before they knew they had a problem? That was genius. Asking questions led me to write a book on how to give a TED Talk. Why do some TED Talks go viral? And most recently, when I learned that Jeff Bezos banned PowerPoint at Amazon, which many of you now know, I asked a number of questions. Why? What did he replace it with? As it turned out, he replaced it with a number of communication tactics that help fuel Amazon's astonishing growth. The patterns are clear. Ideas don't sell themselves. You can have the greatest idea in the world, and we've heard them today, completely innovative, strategic, scalable. But if you cannot convince enough other people to buy into your idea, then you will not be nearly as successful as you should be as leaders. And that's why Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, once said, you cannot overinvest in communication skills, which is why we're here. She said, you cannot just tell people what to do in the workplace and expect them to do it enthusiastically. It doesn't work anymore. You have to persuade them. So the question is, how? We know how. By applying the ancient art of persuasion to modern communication tools. Aristotle, the father of logic, also the father of persuasion, gave us the formula 2,300 years ago. He said that persuasive speakers have ethos, which is character or credibility. To me, that means walking the talk. Your actions back your words. Persuasive speakers have logos, which is what we've been hearing all day. That's the evidence for your argument. The data, the facts, the figures, the statistics that back it up. But he also said that persuasion cannot occur in the absence of pathos, connecting to people emotionally, which you just heard from David. That is critical and actually is a bigger part of the persuasion pie. So now the question becomes, how do we do that? How do we connect with people emotionally? We have a rhetorical tool that has stood the test of time. Look no further than Tony Fadell, former Apple executive who was an employee who he created the iPod. He was nicknamed the father of the iPod that went on to build Nest after Apple. Steve Jobs was his mentor. And when he was recently asked, what is the biggest lesson you learned from Steve Jobs? He said, storytelling, storytelling, storytelling. And he's absolutely right, because he realized that Steve Jobs was an extraordinary presenter, not because he created and designed slides. He was a great presenter because he was a storyteller first. He understood the power of story to connect with people, to sell products, and to inspire people. In 1997, many of you here know the history, Steve Jobs returned to Apple after a 12-year absence. He gave an informal staff meeting. And in that staff meeting, he provided the outline of a story that would become one of the great turnaround stories in corporate history. He also previewed one of the greatest marketing campaigns in corporate history. Here's to the crazy ones. See if you can spot it.
To me, marketing's about values. This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. The way to do that is not to talk about speeds and feeds. It's not to talk about MIPS and megahertz. It's not to talk about why we're better than Windows. Our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for. Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe.
Well, that's one of my favorite quotes. People with passion can change the world for the better. But did you notice something? He, as the leader, all of you in this room, you're the leader. You are the one who has to frame the story. Slides, I don't care if it's PowerPoint, Google Slides, Keynote Slides like Jobs used. Those complement the story, but the story comes first. And it's hard. As famed historian Yuval Noah Harari says, telling effective stories is not easy. Yet when it succeeds, it gives sapiens, our species, immense power because it enables millions of strangers to cooperate and work towards a common goal. And isn't that your job as leaders, to cultivate this culture of innovation and collaboration so that a group of people work together toward a common goal? That comes from you. That comes from leaders. It comes from effective communicators. Now, storytelling is a big subject. I've written an entire book just on business storytelling. Let me find one tactic that I can leave with you today that is proven, has stood the test of time, and you've heard it throughout the day, whether you know it or not, and that is the metaphor. If you remember from your English class, what is a metaphor? Comparing two different things to show their similarities. Going back to Aristotle, to be a master of metaphor is the greatest thing by far. Now, most of you are familiar with metaphors because we read about it in Shakespeare. One of Shakespeare's most famous lines is a metaphor. When Romeo spotted Juliet on the balcony, he said, "It is the east and Juliet is the sun." Well, we all know she's not the sun, but she has similar qualities. She lights up a room. Why should novelists and playwrights have all the fun? Inspiring communicators today all use metaphors and analogies to explain complex ideas. This brings us back to Jeff Bezos. So I just recently wrote a book on Bezos and some of the communication tactics he pioneered at Amazon. Many of you might know why he named his startup Amazon. Now, the famous story is that it started with A in online dictionaries or in the telephone book at the time. That's an ancillary benefit. Bezos was looking for a comparison. Amazon, big selection of books, largest selection of books on the planet. What's large? Amazon is large. Amazon, the Amazon River, Earth's biggest river, Earth's biggest selection. He's looking for metaphors. But he didn't stop there. I'm sure many of you have heard these terms. Jeff Bezos created 2 pizza teams, single-threaded leaders. He hired missionaries over mercenaries. And in one famous metaphor I bet many of you have either heard of or you have employed in your own companies, the flywheel that fueled Amazon's growth. Jeff Bezos did not invent the flywheel concept. He heard about it, he read about it, but he knows a good metaphor when he hears it. And he implemented the flywheel and popularized it. Analogies and metaphors, critical tools in your communicator toolkit. Reach for them when you can. This is Annie Kreitcher. Annie Kreitcher is a nuclear physicist at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, recently named to Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People for her experiments in nuclear fusion, which, as many of you know, is a grand scientific challenge. I was able to take a tour of the lab's largest high-energy laser. This is a silly photograph of me just in front of part of the laser. You cannot get the entire laser in one photo because it takes up about 3 football fields. So that's just one snapshot. It is a big, complex, impressive device. It's also really, really hard to understand. So I tried my own experiment, and I asked Annie Kreitzer first, can you explain what you achieved in nuclear fusion to a fellow nuclear physicist, another PhD? And here's what she said. We were able to achieve ignition, a rapid increase in deuterium-tritium temperature associated with alpha particle self-heating by increasing the hotspot plasma energy density. Now, some of you know exactly what she means, but not most of her stakeholders, which is why her role is a translator. So I then asked Annie Kreitzer, can you explain it to a layperson? And here's how the conversation went. Can you explain your experiments in nuclear fusion and why it's relevant to the world and to all of us?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring the same thing, the same process that powers the sun to the earth so that we can harness this in a controlled laboratory setting. And it's really important because it's the holy grail of the clean future, clean energy future. There's no carbon emissions. It's unlimited, fueled by isotopes of hydrogen. But it's really difficult to do. So we actually have to create these little suns in the laboratory. And my job is to try to figure out how we can do that by changing the target conditions and exactly how we're shooting the laser.
You obviously have learned or sharpened communication skills. Is this an important skill in science and technology?
It is such an important skill. I mean, it's the difference between people paying attention and getting it versus just saying I don't care. I mean, getting the communication out there, that's key, and we're gonna need the entire world to back this up too. We're gonna need the public buy-in, and so you really do have to be able to communicate this in a simple way that also interests people.
And Annie Kreitzer was able to translate for a PhD and for a layperson on the fly. How? I asked Kim Budil, who is the first female director of the Lawrence Livermore Lab, how is it that her scientists are such effective communicators? It's intentional. She said we spend a lot of time helping our scientists communicate in an accessible way. Accessible, making the complex familiar and understandable. Look, I believe that if you can explain complex ideas in a way that is simple, clear, and understandable, that'll take you a long way in your careers. I encourage you to go further. Look at yourself not as a presenter, but as a storyteller. A presentation complements the story, but the story comes first because storytellers inform, they illuminate, they inspire. And personally, I think we need less presentation and more inspiration. Thanks for listening. Let's take some questions.
Thank you, Carmine.